St. Francis of Assisi has a rather shocking and radical fact in his life. The episode that I'm going to narrate is something so shocking that I would not recommend that you try it at home. Everything that we see in the lives of the saints should be admired, but not everything should be applied in our own lives as such. Some things require adaptation. You will soon see what I am talking about. On one occasion, as St. Francis was praying in his cell in the hermitage of Sartiano, he suffered a very violent temptation, a temptation against chastity. Now, how does the saint react when he has a temptation against chastity? Does he give in a little bit so that the temptation reduces? On the contrary, St. Francis was a true lover of chastity, and he knew that the only way he could overcome this temptation was through violence. So he picked up a cord and started whipping himself. And he said, "Brother Donkey," because he used to call his own body Donkey, "you deserve to be beaten. You are unworthy of wearing this religious habit, the sign of purity. And you shall leave this place." Then, in his enthusiasm for chastity, he left his cell and went out to the garden, which was covered in fresh snow. Then, with his own hands, without any gloves, without any protection, he gathered up the snow in 7 big heaps. Then he started talking to himself with these words: "Behold, the first heap of snow is your wife. These 4 are your sons and your daughters. And these 2 are your servant and your maid. Now you must provide for them all, because they are going to lie in the cold. Because if you don't want to live a chaste life, then live a life of a family man." Now with this, the suffering that he had gone through in piling up the cold snow, and the suffering that his own skin felt in that cold was so violent that the devil fled. Then St. Francis returned victorious to his own cell, for by subjugating himself to the intensity of that cold, the internal fire of temptation was totally extinguished. Now, a certain friar had witnessed the scene in the moonlight, and when St. Francis came to know that he had been observed, he spoke to the friar and severely prohibited him from ever telling this fact to anyone as long as he was alive. Of course, we only came to know about this fact after St. Francis's death. Now, what can we learn from this temptation? What can we learn from this fact? Like I said in the beginning, I do not recommend that any one of you who are watching me now throw yourself into the snow or into a lake or do anything like that. Of course, we cannot harm ourselves because we are obliged to take care of our own body. The saint knew by the grace of God that he could do it and his body would resist. He had a very special grace for that. This is not our case. However, there is something we can learn from this. We can learn that we need to do violence against ourselves if we wish to overcome all temptations. Above all, temptations against chastity. Against temptations which provoke us to the sin of the flesh. This violence can be spiritual violence. It need not be physical violence like St. Francis practiced. But even physically, when you are undergoing a severe temptation, there are things that you can do to lessen the intensity of the devil's voice within you. For example, avoiding a certain food item that you enjoy a lot for a certain period of time. Let's say that you really like ice cream. You can offer up not eating ice cream for a certain number of days, offering this up to God to give you strength to fight against temptation, especially against chastity. That is one way you can do violence against yourself. Or maybe You can take a cold shower, even if a warm shower would be more pleasant. Go ahead, fight against yourself. Take a cold shower. Of course, as long as it does not hurt your health. Doing so, you will receive strength to be able to fight much stronger temptations further on in your life. But whatever you do, the way to fight against temptation is not to dialogue with it, not to reason with the devil. Maybe I'll do a little bit now, then a little bit later, but I won't commit a big sin. If somebody tries to fight against temptation in this way, his own life becomes a torment. First of all, that person will fall into temptation every once in a while, even if he does not want to. Secondly, the virtue that he does practice will become unbearable, because virtue is something we are supposed to practice in all its integrity. And the more we practice it, the easier it gets. The more we try to arrive at a compromise between virtue and vice, the more difficult it becomes to practice virtue. Now, I have saved the best for last. There is a very powerful weapon to fight against impure temptation, without which everything else we do is basically useless. And this is to have a very, very intense devotion to our Blessed Mother. This is a devotion that St. Francis practiced in a truly intense manner. If he had not done so, he would not be the great St. Francis that we know today. And, by the way, if you desire to grow in your own love and devotion to our Blessed Mother, I recommend that you do your consecration to Jesus through the hands of Mary. We'll have a link in the description below. So now, let us ask St. Francis the grace to practice all the virtues in their integrity, but especially that he may help us in all the temptations against the sins of the flesh. Now, impurity is not the only temptation that we face. We also have to fight against many other temptations that we encounter in our life. I recommend that you watch next week's video, where I'm going to tell you what happened when St. Francis perceived that another brother was going through a severe temptation of pride, and what he did to expel that demon by playing a trick on the devil. I hope to see you there. Salve Maria.